In a world ruled by silence and pain, man and beast held tight to one another, connected by something deeper than words. Ryan never imagined his path would cross so completely with a creature as wild and untamed as Molly, a rescued bobcat whose golden eyes mirrored the soul of the wilderness. When fate struck without warning, it was Molly who sensed the shift before it came. The human body is a fragile vessel, strong and steady one moment, crumbling the next beneath the weight of the unexpected. His mind sank into darkness. A brain, hemorrhage stealing the light in an instant. It hit like lightning, fast, cruel, and without mercy, pulling him to the edge of death. He had once saved Molly, given her another shot at life, and now, in ways he never could have foreseen, she refused to let him slip away. How far can the invisible thread of connection stretch between two souls, one wild, one human? When death tries to break it? Join us on an emotional journey where love crosses species, miracles challenge science, and the untamed heart beats in sync with our own. Before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. The late afternoon sun spilled long shadows across the wooden deck of Ryan Jessen's quiet Colorado home, tucked at the edge of untamed land. The house, simple but striking in its unity with nature, reflected the soul of its owner. Ryan, a 33-year-old landscape designer with kind eyes and work-worn hands, sat at the edge of the deck watching Molly, his rescued bobcat, prowl playfully through the tall grasses beyond. "Come on, girl," he called gently, patting the weathered boards beside him. "Dinner time." The sleek feline paused, ears swiveling toward his voice. Unlike most bobcats, Molly showed no fear of people, at least not of Ryan. Their bond had begun 3 years ago when he found her, a tiny orphaned kit clinging to life, her mother likely the victim of poachers. Though he'd planned to handy her off to a rehab center, their connection grew fast and unbreakable. With special permits and extensive training, Ryan became one of the rare few allowed to keep a bobcat, not as a pet, but as what he called a wild companion. Molly padded toward the deck, her dappled coat catching the golden light. Smaller than most females, likely due to her harsh beginnings, she carried herself with a quiet strength. Her eyes, ancient and wise, told stories of survival and instinct. She leapt up with ease, brushing against Ryan's leg before settling beside him, accepting his gentle touch behind her tufted ears. "Just you and me tonight," Ryan said softly. His sister Michelle was due to visit tomorrow, a thought that made him smile despite the stubborn headache that had been bothering him for days. Michelle and Molly had a mutual understanding of space. Michelle still wasn't quite used to the idea of a wild predator living under her brother's roof, and Molly, in turn, kept her distance. Ryan rubbed his temples as the sharp pain returned. Worse than before. He'd been running himself into the ground lately, working overtime on a demanding landscape project for a luxurious mountain lodge. Maybe he was dehydrated, or just run down. He'd rest, drink some water, feel better by morning. But when he stood, a wave of dizziness swept over him. The world spun strangely, the sunset bleeding into streaks of red and gold. He reached for the railing but grasped only empty air. The deck surged upward to meet him, and the last thing he heard was Molly's startled cry as he fell without falling. As night crept in, Molly paced the house's edge, her movements restless and deliberate. Something was wrong. Her human had fallen, and now lay too still on the wooden deck. He didn't respond to her gentle prods nor to her increasingly anxious cries. Her acute senses picked up the irregular rhythm of his breathing, too shallow, too erratic. His scent had shifted, carrying a metallic sharpness that stirred old alarms deep in her instincts. The night deepened, and so did her unease. Molly stayed, close, lying beside him, then circling the deck's edge, scanning the forest with glowing eyes. She knew vulnerability invited danger, and she would not abandon him. But as the hours passed with no change, her behavior grew more desperate. Near midnight, headlights cut through the dark as Michelle's car turned into the gravel drive, a day earlier than planned. She hadn't been able to sleep, a gnawing feeling telling her to check on Ryan. They'd only had each other since the car crash that took their parents when Ryan was 22 and Michelle just 18. Their bond ran deep, strong enough that sometimes they simply knew. As she stepped out of the car, something unbelievable happened. Instead of melting into the shadows, the way she always did when strangers arrived, Molly stayed. As Michelle arrived, the Bobcat appeared at the edge of the deck, letting out a series of urgent, unfamiliar calls. Sounds Michelle had never heard before. "Ryan," she called, her voice tightening with sudden worry. When there was no reply, she approached slowly, recalling her brother's many warnings about giving Molly space. But tonight there was no trace of territoriality in the Bobcat's stance. Instead, Molly moved deliberately, pacing between Michelle and the far corner of the deck, her message unmistakable. Guided by the animal's strange urgency, Michelle rounded the corner and found her brother collapsed, motionless in the moonlight, his skin pale and waxy. "Ryan!" she cried, dropping to her knees. Her fingers trembled as they searched for a pulse while the other hand fumbled to pull out her phone. "Oh God, Ryan, please!" As Michelle called 911, Molly positioned herself protectively near Ryan's head, her body taut with alertness. Her golden eyes never wavered from his face. A low, steady rumble came from deep in her chest. Not quite a purr, not quite a growl. It was something in between. Something that said, stay, fight, live. The small Boulder hospital wasn't equipped to handle the gravity of Ryan's condition. A CT scan revealed a massive brain hemorrhage, one requiring immediate specialized treatment. Within hours, Ryan was airlifted to the University of Colorado Hospital in Denver, while Michelle followed behind by car, her thoughts spiraling into panic. "He's young, otherwise healthy," the ER physician had said, his face grave but not without a glimmer of hope. "That gives him an edge. But I won't lie. This kind of hemorrhage is very serious. We'll do everything we can." Everything. They could included placing Ryan in a medically induced coma to ease the swelling, followed by emergency surgery to relieve pressure on his brain. The neurosurgeon, Dr. Elena Vasquez, emerged from the operating room hours later, her expression measured but not cold. "We were able to stop the bleeding and reduce the intracranial pressure," she told Michelle, her voice firm yet compassionate. "The next 48 hours are critical. We won't know the full extent of the damage until we begin bringing him out of the coma, several days from now at the earliest." "What caused this?" Michelle asked, her voice barely more than a whisper in the stark fluorescent hallway. "He's only 33. Sometimes these aneurysms are congenital, present from birth but undetectable until they rupture," Dr. Vasquez explained. "Other times they're caused by factors like chronic high blood pressure or smoking, and in many cases," she gave a gentle shrug, "we never find a clear reason." She rested a reassuring hand on Michelle's shoulder. "What matters now is that you acted quickly. That gave him a fighting chance." Not me, Michelle thought. It was Molly. The days that followed blurred into each other. Michelle split her time between the hospital and Ryan's house, where Molly's behavior had shifted from agitated to haunting. The Bobcat refused food, paced without rest, and spent long hours perched at the windows, staring toward the city. Though Ryan had secured a rare permit allowing him to keep her, Molly couldn't be left alone indefinitely. Yet Michelle knew that moving her, even temporarily, to a sanctuary would break Ryan's heart when he recovered. So she stayed. Michelle slept in the guest room, coexisting uneasily with the grieving wildcat. She followed every line of Ryan's carefully written care instructions, offering untouched meals, respecting the boundaries he'd established to keep Molly mentally balanced. But as the days stretched on, something began to change. Maybe it was their mutual worry for Ryan, or maybe it was just necessity. Either way, the distance between woman and Bobcat started to fade. It began with small things. Michelle speaking out loud to fill the silence, updating Molly on Ryan's condition as if the animal could understand. "His brain activity's stable," she said one evening, curled on the couch with a cold cup of tea cradled in her hands. Dr. Vasquez says that's good, but they're still swelling and they're not sure. Her voice faltered. When she looked up, she found Molly watching her from across the room, still and silent. He's fighting, Molly, Michelle whispered. He's so strong. At the sound of Ryan's name, Molly's ears twitched forward. For the first time, she approached Michelle, slowly and deliberately, settling on the far end of the couch. It wasn't exactly friendship, but it was something, an acknowledgement of their shared vigil. By the 6th day, with Ryan still unresponsive in the hospital, Molly's health had worsened. She barely slept, refused all food, and had begun clawing at the door whenever Michelle prepared to leave for the hospital. I don't know what to do, Michelle confessed during her daily update call with Dr. Vasquez. She's grieving, herself sick, and I'm worried she'll hurt herself trying to escape and find him. There was a long silence on the line before Dr. Vasquez spoke. This may sound unconventional, but have you considered bringing her to the hospital for a visit? Is that even allowed? Typically no, Dr. Vasquez admitted. But we make exceptions for service animals. And while your brother's Bobcat doesn't technically qualify, we know that familiar presences can sometimes reach patients when nothing else can. I'd need to get special approval, and there would be strict conditions, but it might help them both. Michelle closed her eyes, imagining Ryan's face if he knew Molly was being kept away from him in his absence. Let me check the legalities with his wildlife permit. If we can make it work safely, I think Ryan would want us to try. 2 days later, after countless conversations with hospital administrators, wildlife officials, and Ryan's veterinarian, plan was set. Molly would be allowed a brief, controlled visit during a quiet evening hour when the ICU floor was least busy. She would be transported in her travel kennel and kept on the harness Ryan used for their rare public outings. Michelle would be responsible for controlling Molly at all times, and if there was any sign of distress from Molly, Ryan, or the hospital staff, the visit would end immediately. The night of the visit, Michelle was surprised by how calmly Molly entered the travel kennel. It was as if the Bobcat understood the purpose of the journey. The drive to Denver was silent, except for the occasional soft chirps from the back seat, quiet sounds Molly typically reserved for Ryan alone. At the hospital, they were greeted by Dr. Vasquez and a nurse named Thomas, who, to Michelle's relief, had experience with exotic animals from his previous work at a zoo hospital. I'll go in first to check his vitals and prepare the room, Thomas said gently as he glanced at the kennel. We've minimized the equipment around the bed as much as possible, and I'll make sure the alarms are set to silent alert so they won't startle her. Michelle nodded, grateful for their consideration. She's usually calm around Ryan. I just don't know how she'll react seeing him like this. Dr. Vasquez studied Molly with professional curiosity. Animals often sense things we don't. Just follow our lead and remember, this is as much for her as it is for him. When they finally entered Ryan's room, Michelle was struck again by how small he looked, surrounded by medical equipment. After a week in a coma, his face was drawn, his skin pale against the stark white sheets. The only sounds in the room were the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Michelle set the kennel down near the bed and knelt beside it, speaking softly to Molly. We're here, girl. Ryan's here. As she opened the kennel door, Molly emerged cautiously, her sensitive nose twitching as she processed the unfamiliar smells of the hospital room. Her ears flattened slightly at the strange surroundings, but her gaze quickly found Ryan. She approached slowly, stopping at the bedside, her golden eyes locked onto his face. Thomas moved to help, carefully lowering the bed rail on one side. It's okay, he reassured Michelle. Let's see what she wants to do. For a long moment, Molly stood still, her tail flicking as she studied Ryan. Then, with surprising gentleness, she leapt onto the bed, navigating around the various lines to curl up between Ryan's legs, her favorite resting spot at home. She stretched along his side, her head lightly resting against his ribs, and closed her eyes, attuned to the slow rhythm of his breathing. The room fell silent as they watched this reunion, too moved to speak. Minutes passed, and Molly remained perfectly still, her breath rising and falling in time with Ryan's. Then, something extraordinary happened. Something extraordinary happened next. Thomas noticed it first, a subtle change in the heart monitor. His heart rate is increasing slightly, he murmured, moving to check the readout. Nothing concerning, just different. Dr. Vasquez approached the bedside, her experienced eyes scanning both the monitors and her patient. His respiratory rate is changing, too, she observed. These are the kinds of fluctuations we sometimes see when coma patients perceive something meaningful. A familiar voice, a beloved piece of music, or the presence of a beloved companion. Michelle's attention remained fixed on Molly as the Bobcat began to make a sound she'd never heard before. It wasn't the soft purr of a domestic cat, but a deeper, more resonant vibration that seemed to travel through Molly's entire body and into Ryan's. "That's fascinating," Thomas whispered. "Bobcats don't actually purr like house cats, their throat structures are different, but she's creating a similar vibration." As if in response to this observation, Ryan's fingers on his right hand twitched. A small movement, barely perceptible but unmistakable to those watching closely. Michelle gasped, reaching for her brother's hand. "Can you hear me?" she whispered urgently. Dr. Vasquez moved quickly to Ryan's bedside, extracting her pen light to check his pupillary response. "This could be reflex movement," she said calmly, though her voice was tinged with hope. "But combined with the changes in his vitals, I'm encouraged." "Ryan," she said, keeping her voice measured yet firm, "if you can hear my voice, try to squeeze your sister's hand." A full minute passed in silence, and Michelle's brief spark of hope began to fade. But Molly hadn't moved. Her body remained pressed against Ryan's side, the unusual vibration still emanating from her chest. Then, so faintly that Michelle almost thought she imagined it, she felt the slightest pressure against her fingers, a ghost of a squeeze. "He squeezed," Michelle whispered, tears filling her eyes. Dr. Vasquez nodded, her expression cautiously optimistic. "His brain activity is definitely increasing," she said. "This doesn't mean he's waking up immediately. The process of emerging from a coma, especially a medically induced one, is gradual. But these are encouraging signs." They remained there for nearly an hour, Molly staying beside Ryan, while Dr. Vasquez monitored his vital signs and occasionally tested for responses. Each time the reactions grew slightly stronger. A finger twitch, a slight change in breathing, a more definite squeeze of Michelle's hand when his name was spoken. When it was time to leave, Michelle braced herself for resistance from Molly. But the Bobcat seemed strangely satisfied. She allowed herself to be guided back into the travel kennel without protest, her eyes fixed on Ryan until the very last moment. "What happens now?" Michelle asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty as they prepared to leave. "Now we watch and wait," Dr. Vasquez replied gently. "Based on what we've seen tonight, I think we can begin to slowly reduce his sedation tomorrow. A bit earlier than we'd originally planned. The rest will be up to him." She smiled softly. "And perhaps up to Molly, too." The next 3 days brought gradual but steady improvement. Ryan's brain activity continued to increase, and as the medical team carefully reduced his sedation, he began to show more consistent responses, turning toward voices, responding to simple commands like, "Squeeze my hand" or "Wiggle your toes." On the 4th day after Molly's visit, Ryan opened his eyes for the first time. His gaze was unfocused at first, his consciousness still drifting. But when Michelle leaned over him and spoke his name, his eyes found hers. They locked for a moment of recognition, and tears streamed down Michelle's face. "You're in the hospital," she explained gently, knowing he might not remember. "You had a brain hemorrhage, but you're getting better." Ryan's brow furrowed, confusion evident in his eyes. His mouth worked silently around the ventilator tube, clearly trying to communicate something. "Don't try to talk yet," Michelle soothed, her voice trembling. "The doctors are hoping to remove the breathing tube soon if you keep improving like this." But Ryan's expression grew more distressed. His hand weakly lifted to tug at the tube, a desperate movement. "He's fighting the ventilator," the attending nurse observed quietly. That's actually a good sign. A good sign, Dr. Vasquez said. It means his own breathing drive is strong. She was called to assess Ryan, and after a thorough examination, she decided it was time to attempt extubation. His oxygen levels are good, and his latest scans show significant improvement in the brain swelling, she explained. If he can breathe on his own, removing the tube will make him more comfortable and allow him to communicate. The process was quick but uncomfortable for Ryan, leaving him coughing and disoriented. But once the tube was out and replaced with a simple oxygen cannula, the relief in his eyes was evident. He swallowed painfully several times before managing a raspy whisper. Molly. Michelle's heart swelled at the sound. Of course, his first word would be for the companion who might have saved his life twice now. First by alerting Michelle to his collapse, and then by somehow reaching him in the depths of his coma. She's at home and she misses you terribly, Michelle assured him, squeezing his hand. She actually came to visit you a few days ago. The doctors made a special exception. Ryan's eyes widened slightly, a ghost of a smile touching his cracked lips. I felt her, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Thought I was dreaming. Felt her weight, her breathing, heard her. Dr. Vasquez exchanged a meaningful glance with Michelle. You were deeply sedated at that point, Ryan, she said gently. It's remarkable that you were aware of her presence. Ryan's eyelids drooped, exhaustion claiming him once again. She called me back, he murmured, his words slurring as he drifted toward sleep. Was floating away? She called me home. Recovery was neither swift nor easy. Ryan faced weeks of hospitalization followed by months of rehabilitation. The hemorrhage had left him with weakness on his left side and occasional difficulty finding words, challenges that frustrated the formerly active outdoorsman. But where medical science offered treatments for his physical recovery, it was Molly who seemed to provide the motivation he needed on the darkest days. Initially, after being discharged from the hospital to a rehabilitation facility, Ryan's separation from Molly continued to weigh heavily on them both. Michelle maintained her dual caregiving role, dividing her time between visiting her brother and tending to the increasingly restless Bobcat. She knows you're coming home soon, Michelle told Ryan during one visit, showing him videos of Molly investigating the accommodations she had made to help with his recovery. Widened doorways, a ramp to the deck, grab bars at strategic locations. I think she's supervising all the changes. Ryan's smile, though slightly lopsided from lingering facial weakness, lit up his entire face. Keeping you in line, is she? He said. His speech improved dramatically, though he still searched for words occasionally. She always did think she was in charge, Michelle teased. The day Ryan finally came home, leaning heavily on a cane but proudly walking under his own power, was marked by a moment neither he nor Michelle would ever forget. As the car pulled up to the house, Molly appeared on the deck. Her spotted body was perfectly still, except for the quivering tip of her tail. When Ryan emerged from the passenger seat, moving slowly but steadily, the Bobcat made a sound Michelle had never heard before, a series of chirps that rose in pitch and urgency, almost like a question. Yes, it's me, Ryan called softly, his voice breaking with emotion. I'm home, Molly girl. What happened next would have alarmed anyone who didn't understand their unique relationship. Molly launched herself from the deck in a fluid leap, covering the distance to Ryan in seconds. But instead of knocking him over, as Michelle had feared, the Bobcat circled him once, rubbing against his legs before sitting directly in front of him. Her golden eyes were fixed on his face with an intensity that seemed to communicate volumes. Ryan carefully lowered himself to one knee, balancing with his cane, and extended his free hand. Molly pressed her head against his palm and then moved forward to touch her nose to his, a greeting that brought tears to his eyes. Missed you too, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Thank you for finding help. In the months that followed, as Ryan worked through the grueling process of regaining his strength and relearning certain skills, Molly never strayed far from his side. She adapted her behavior to his new limitations, no longer jumping onto furniture when he was nearby, seemingly aware of his precarious balance. During his daily physical therapy exercises, she would position herself where he could see her. Her attentive presence became a constant motivation on the days when frustration overwhelmed him, and progress seemed impossible. It was Molly who drew him out of despair, bringing her favorite toy mouse to drop at his feet, or simply pressing against his leg until he acknowledged her presence. "It's like she knows when I need a reminder to keep going," Ryan said once, his voice full of wonder. "Like she's been holding me up the whole time." "She's my personal therapist," Ryan joked to Michelle during one of her regular visits. They sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the Colorado mountains in shades of amber and rose, while Molly patrolled the yard below. "Except she has much better bedside manner than the actual therapists." Michelle smiled, noting how much stronger her brother looked than even a month ago. "You know," she said, "Dr. Vasquez has been following your case with particular interest. She's never seen anything quite like what happened when Molly visited you in the ICU." Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been trying to explain it to my cognitive therapist, but it sounds crazy even to me. I was nowhere, floating, in this dark, quiet place. No pain, no fear, just nothing." He paused, searching for the right words. "Then I felt this weight, this warmth and vibration. Not sound exactly, but something I could feel inside me. It was like being called by a voice that doesn't use words." He reached down to stroke Molly as she returned to the deck, settling at his feet with a contented chuff. "The doctors can call it coincidence, or say it was just time for me to start responding, but I know what happened," he said, meeting Michelle's gaze steadily. "She found me when I was lost and she led me home." Michelle didn't argue. She had seen too much over the past months to dismiss her brother's experience. From Molly's distress before anyone knew Ryan was in danger to the remarkable changes in his vital signs during her hospital visit, to the inexplicable bond that seemed to have deepened through their shared trauma. "You know," she said instead, "I always thought you were a little crazy for keeping a wild animal as a companion. I worried about you, about whether it was fair to her." She smiled ruefully. "I've never been happier to be proven wrong." Ryan laughed, the sound still the greatest music to Michelle's ears after coming so close to losing him forever. "Don't tell her that," he teased. "She already has a big enough ego." As if understanding his words, Molly raised her head and fixed him with a dignified stare before pointedly looking away, a gesture so human-like that both siblings burst into laughter. The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in deepening shades of purple and blue. In the gathering twilight, the lines between human and animal, between the explainable and the mysterious, seemed to blur. Whatever science might say about coincidence or animal instinct, or the power of familiar presences to reach through the fog of coma, Ryan and Michelle knew a deeper truth. Sometimes the most profound connections transcend understanding, reaching across the boundaries between species and even perhaps between life and death. Ryan reached down to scratch Molly behind her tufted ears, his movements stronger and more fluid than they had been in many months. "What do you think, girl? Ready for a short walk before dinner?" Molly chirped her agreement, rising to pace expectantly toward the steps that led down from the deck. As Ryan followed, leaning less heavily on his cane than the week before, Michelle watched them go, man and Bobcat, survivor and savior, moving together into the gentle embrace of the coming night. In that moment, she understood with perfect clarity what Ryan had tried to explain about being called home. Love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force in the universe. A beacon that could guide lost souls back from the darkest places. And sometimes that beacon came in the most unexpected forms, carried by hearts that beat to rhythms different from our own, but no less true, no less vital, no less miraculous.